Welcome to the Conoy Church Podcast. We're glad that you're interested in connecting through this teaching time. If you'd like to connect further, feel free to reach out to us through our website, conoychurch.org. For now, enjoy this teaching from Conoy Church, where our mission is to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ.
Well, good morning. Glad to be with you guys today. Excited to jump into another topic here. Remember that these topics that we're dealing with this summer for our summer series are all one-off topics. So if you have not been around for any of this series yet, that's all right. You don't have to worry about it. Each week is connected because we're talking about items in Christianity that perhaps could be false, that we've bought into, or items in Christianity that there might be an alternative way to look at. And so each week we're talking about a different topic. It's not connected beyond what I just said. And I have given myself a 30-minute timer. So the additional challenge is that I can pump this out in a way that's understandable for you without going over my time limit here. So we're going to get started. This morning we're talking about something called the Seven Mountain Mandate. And in order to talk about it, I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of things first to set that up. And the first thing I want to talk about is Jesus. And I want to talk about the way that Jesus approaches ministry, because I think this is really essential. If you were to open up your Bibles right now to Matthew chapter 4, you will find a story about the temptation of Jesus, where Jesus has gone into the wilderness, into the desert. And in the desert, Jesus is preparing to go into ministry. He's been fasting, he's been praying, and he's been doing this for 40 days. And it's at this point that Satan comes to him and tries to tempt him. And here is how Satan tempts him. The first thing Satan does, he does three things. The first thing Satan says is turn these stones, I can write that shorter. He says, turn these stones into bread. Okay? That's the first thing. And what he's essentially saying is, Jesus, you're hungry, and I know you are. So use your power to take these stones, use your gifts, use your power, take these stones and turn them to bread. Use your power in a way that meets your needs. The second thing Satan does in order to tempt Jesus is he says, throw yourself from the top of the temple and have the angels catch you. For the scripture says that the angels will keep you from your foot striking a single stone. So if you really are the Son of God, then let's see God save you. He'll send his angels and stop you from hitting the ground if you throw yourself down. And then the third thing that Satan says is, I will give you all the kingdoms of the world if you will simply bow down and worship me. Now, each of these things, Jesus rejects, right? That's the story. And if you did take the time to open up to Matthew chapter 4 and you're following along, you can see that each of the times that Satan tries to tempt Jesus, Jesus says no, and he uses scripture to refute Satan. But every single time he says no. What I want to point out to you here is something really important. Each time Satan tries to tempt Jesus, he is tempting Jesus to use power. This is the common denominator here. In the first temptation, Satan is tempting Jesus to use his power over the stones. In the second one, he is tempting Jesus to use God's power to save him from harm. And in the third one, again, This is very simple, but if you worship Satan, this is what he says, if you worship me, I give you authority over all of the kingdoms of the world. So all of the kings that are out there, all of the kingdoms that are out there, all of the queens and the whatever rulers that are, all you have to do is bow down. Just do it my way, and I give you power over the world, right? So once again, the promise is power over, okay? This is the thing that ties these temptations together each time, is that it is a promise of power over, or it is a temptation to use power over. That is not the way of Jesus. What is the way of Jesus? Well, the best way for us to discover the way of Jesus is simply for us to be in Scripture, in the Gospels. And if we look at the life of Jesus, we know that Jesus doesn't use power over. But even more explicitly, we can go to the book of Philippians, chapter 2, and there's a passage there that we can read. So if you want to flip to Philippians chapter 2, you can. The Apostle Paul writes this letter to a group of Christians in a city called Philippi. And in Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 to 8, he is telling them, I really would love if you guys could have the same mindset as Jesus. And what's the mindset he describes? Here's what he says. Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. So, Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something for him to use to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking on the nature of a servant. And what did that servant look like? It looked like a man. Now, he being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself, which means even a step further down. He humbled himself by allowing himself to die. So Jesus, equivalent to God, the authority of God, didn't consider this something to be used to his own advantage, made himself a servant, being found in appearance as a man. That could have been the whole thing right there. But instead, he takes it a step further and allows himself to experience mortality. But that's still not the end of the passage, is it? Because he says, even further, by becoming obedient to death, even death on a... And you might say, well, Nick, that's death, isn't it? No, because the cross was a criminal's death. The cross was the worst kind of death you can imagine at the time. If you died a death on a cross, then you were thought of as your soul was in jeopardy forever. So we call this the Great Condescension, which I can't spell. I need spell check for that, which is why it's in my notes. Okay? That's what we call this. What Satan did is said, let me get you to try and do power over. Well, Jesus had all the power over you could imagine. And instead, what he chose to do was descend. And he used power under. And even at the point where he descended to be dying on a cross, was he still not at work? Right? And I'm not even saying salvation. I'm saying as he died a death on a cross, was there not someone who hung next to him? Who was having a conversation with him, right? Jesus was working the whole time to bring about the reunification of mankind who had broken peace with God. All right? This is a power under situation that then brought all of us back into peace with God. Right? This is a power under. And the reason I'm starting here is because if we don't understand this, everything else I'm going to say is going to be much harder. Power over versus power under. The temptation was this: use power over. And Jesus said, my way is not that way. My way is this way. I will lower myself from the highest of the high to the lowest of the low so that I can bring all of you back with me. Okay? Are you with me? Okay, now, here's the lie that I want to talk about today. And I am going to call it a lie. Something called Dominion Theology. This is an idea that is based on a single verse in the Bible. And you guys all know how I feel about single verses. Single verses lack context. When we pull single verses out of the Bible, we can make them say whatever we want. It's just like if you and I were having a conversation, and I decided to quote one single sentence that you said to me, I can really make that conversation sound however I want it to say, right? I can pull that out. We do that with sound bites in the news and media all the time right now, okay? When we do that with the Bible, we can make the Bible say whatever we want. So in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, there is a verse that says, and you've all heard it, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the seas, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth on the earth. Right? That's a verse we've all heard. As we think about the creation of the world, we know that verse. God's command to mankind to be fruitful and multiply and take care of the earth. You guys are in charge of the plants and the animals. You guys are in charge of taking care of this place. Now go do the work. But there's a word in there that some folks have focused on: dominion. And even though when we read the verse, it's pretty clear that the verse is saying, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air. It's specifically talking about specific things. We've interpreted, or some people have interpreted dominion as saying that God has given them authority to institute specific understandings of Christianity onto the people around us. And the way that that's done is through domination. Domination. Power over. Now, what are some examples in history of the way that we have dominated others? Well, an easy one would be the Crusades. Okay? What are the Crusades? Crusades are a holy war led by the church. And the effort was to recapture a specific area of land. And we did that by killing 1.7 million people. People that didn't believe in Christianity, that weren't like us. But the death toll was huge over the course of several hundred years as we fought over specific land, and the church blessed this thing, okay? That's an easy one. What's another example? The Inquisition. The Inquisition was a time in the history of the church when the church said we're going to root out heresy. And so as we do that, we're going to do it by torturing people. And sometimes we're going to torture them to death. And so specifically, we're going to look for people who might be witches, or Jewish, or Muslim, or not believing in God, or not believing quite the right thing, or saying it the right way. And we hunted them down, and we tortured them. And over the course of a couple of hundred years, the death toll was 33,000 people. These are ways that the church has, and these are famous ways. These are easy examples. We've dominated. We've taken our beliefs, and we have tried to dominate the world around us with those beliefs. Are we worried about these things happening today? Probably not. I don't think that's going to happen. But what are ways that it does happen today? Well, how about an example that I used last week? Remember, as I shared with you kind of the history of when Anabaptists suddenly blossomed, right? We had this span of time after the Orthodox and Catholic Church split, where it was just the Catholic Church, and then you had this thing called the Protestant Reformation. And during the Protestant Reformation, you had primarily the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, which was mostly Lutheran at the time, okay? And it was during this time that the radical reformers, which are the Anabaptists, showed up. Remember this from last week? And what did I say they first did? The first steps they took were saying, we don't agree with infant baptism. So what did they do? They went to their town councils and they said, we would like to practice something different. But the town councils were full of folks who were either Protestant or Catholic. There's no separation of church or state. And so when they had the vote, they said, oh, we voted. You can't do that. You still have to do it our way. And then they said, well, let's have a vote on separation of church or state. Oh, we voted. You still have to do it our way. And there was no way but the agreed upon Christian way that dominated the society at large. And so the radical reformers met in secret. They baptized each other in secret. They became outlaws, persecuted, and martyred because of things like infant baptism, because they wanted to baptize adults. They were killed, right? That sort of stuff does happen when we dominate society by forcing our specific ideals on society in specific ways. Now, let's talk about because this is a fun topic. What makes a cult a cult? There's like 4 things that make a cult a cult. One would be authoritarian control, which means don't question leadership, maximum control over your life, and we try to get you away from others. Extreme beliefs, so beliefs that are very, very different from what we call the norm, but also not being allowed to question those beliefs. A few years ago, we had a series we talked about dogma, doctrine, and difference. And we said dogma was the things that make you a Christian, doctrine were the things that made you part of our denomination, and difference were the things that we could kind of disagree on, but it was okay. And in a cult, the extreme beliefs are all dogmatic. And if you don't agree on those things, you're out, or you're a problem, right? Or we got to scare you back into believing those things. A 4th thing, isolation from society. If you join a cult, immediately we need to isolate you from your friends or from your family because that makes it a lot easier to provide control over you and to get you to believe what we believe. And the 4th thing is like veneration or worship of a single person, all right? Now, Scientology is something that has been listed as a religious group at some point and cult at other times. It's gone back and forth depending on what point in time you are looking at it in history. Scientology is not the kind of cult that we often hear about in the news. The kind of cult we hear about in the news is the ones that are like doomsday cults. We're waiting for a certain comet to pass, and then we drink the Kool-Aid and everybody dies, right? Those are the things we often hear about in the news. Scientology is a religious cult. It's not waiting for a specific moment. It's always going, it's ongoing, it's working towards something. So what is Scientology? Well, let me tell you a little bit about Scientology. Scientology was founded by a guy named L. Ron Hubbard. And L. Ron Hubbard was a science fiction writer. That was his job. That's what he did. And in 1946, famously quoted as saying, "You don't make a lot of money writing science fiction, but if you want to make," I did that backwards, $1 million, you should found your own religion. In 1950, he wrote the book that founded Scientology. What does Scientology believe? Scientology believes that human beings have some sort of a spirit within them that is immortal. It's trapped inside a human body, which doesn't sound too crazy, right? But let me go on. The immortal spiritual being that's trapped inside of our human bodies is something that has lived countless past lives. And some of those countless past lives were lived before the spiritual being came to earth. And that doesn't mean in heaven. That means on other alien planets. Yeah. So I'm just going to draw a planet there. Also, there's an evil Lord Xenu who, I don't even know how to draw an evil Lord Xenu, but millions of years ago, evil Lord Xenu, who was an alien, captured millions of a diverse group of aliens. And he brought them to Earth, And he took those aliens and he dumped them into Earth's volcanoes where they died. But their spirits got out and they started roaming the earth. And the spirits of those aliens found a habitable place inside human beings. And so the reason that human beings are sad and depressed and have problems is because of all of the spirits of the aliens that came out of the volcanoes that Lord Dino dropped off millions of years ago are inside of us. So Scientology is a religion that his goal is to take us on a path of enlightenment to get rid of these bad spirits inside of us that cause us to be sad and other things. Now, that's sort of the basics of what Scientology believes. And it sounds like a science fiction writer wrote it, doesn't it? Yeah, okay. What does Scientology need? Well, Scientology needs Scientology needs capital, money. It needs credibility. I got lost on my eyes there. I might have too many eyes on that word. It's totally possible. And it needs influence. Those are the three things that it needs in order to spread. Now, I'm not going to talk about this morning, capital, the money side. Scientology has been sued so much in the last 50 years. Mostly, it's been illegal, Ponzi schemes, all kinds of stuff to raise its money, but it's been successful, and so it is quite wealthy. What I want to talk about are these two things, credibility and influence. In order for Scientology to spread, Scientology has a particular mission in order to get it to spread. And the way that it gets credibility is from its membership. So how do we get members to be a part of this? We get famous, respectable, powerful people to buy into this religion. And we don't even have to say it, and I'm not going to say it over the microphone for the online crew here, but we know famous people who are a part of the Scientology movement that give credibility to the movement, right? Okay. So they have a goal of finding people who are powerful, respectable, and famous. In fact, they actually have it is a on paper written out plan called Influence Celebrity. And their goal is to go after celebrities to get them to join this so they can be more influential. Now, that's how they get credibility, is they get their, we'll say celebs, okay? And we'll say, I don't know, powerful and respectable, okay? Those three categories of people. Now, how do they get influence? How is it that they can get the influence to make sure that when they get sued, they can still keep going? How do they get the influence to make sure that when people leave the church and say bad things about them, they can shut it down? How do they get the influence to make sure that when there are legitimately videos that circulate of them chasing ex-members of the church in black SUVs and showing up at their door, they can get that stuff shut out of a court so that no one gets in trouble? How do they get that kind of influence? They get that kind of influence by getting their membership into positions of power. Okay? So it's not just about getting celebrities and people who have power and people who are respectable. It's about getting people who can be in politics. It's about getting people who can be in the government, who can be judges, who can be in business, because those things make money, because those things allow them to have influence so they can keep the whole thing going. Are you with me? Making sense? Okay. I'm not describing anything that isn't already out there for you to know. This isn't a top secret. It just is. This is the way Scientology works. And I'm using Scientology today, not because that's what we're talking about, and not because I fear that some of you are going to go become Scientologists. I'm using that because the thing I want to talk about has some eerie similarities to me. And I think the best way I can show you that is by talking about something that is so far from Christianity that you can all look at it and go, yeah, it seems a little scary to hear about what they believe and hear about their intent on propagating that belief. And in fact, a quote here, just before I end Scientology, where's a religious scholar from the University of Waco said, Scientologists participate in culture instead of being isolated with the aim to utterly remake the world. That's the goal. The goal is to change the world through influence, through their membership, and through the money. Right? That's the goal. And that probably is the goal of most religions. So, now I want to talk about, with 5 minutes left, Seven Mountain Mandate, which is the thing that I wanted to talk about the whole time. But I had to talk about those things because if I don't talk about these things, you don't understand what the problem is. So here you go. 7 Mountain Mandate. What is it? And why does Nick think it's a problem? These are mountains. 3, 4, 5. No, it's 6. There's 7. Okay. Let me write them up first. That way I don't have to worry about doing it later. And then I'll tell you what it is. All right. These are the 7 mountains: family, media, religion, entertainment, education, business, and government. The 7 Mountain Mandate. In 1975, so after this, in 1975, there was a group of evangelical leaders that felt like they had received a message from God. And this message was to invade 7 areas of society. One of these leaders was in charge of a massive mission organization called YWAM. You might be familiar with it. One leader was in charge of an organization called Campus Crusade, and one of them was a Christian philosopher. And for 25 years, they did virtually nothing with the idea. And around the year 2000, there was a Christian political activist who has an incredible gift for self-promotion, who one of these 3 guys talked to. And he thought, what an idea this is. And so he went to the pastor of a megachurch called Bethel, and he talked to him about this idea. And in 2013, that pastor wrote a book called The 7 Mountain Mandate, Invading Babylon. And from 2013 on, this has been a fairly popular movement in a number of different denominations, churches that have been heavily influenced by the Bethel church movement. And here's the basic idea. If Christians can control 7 specific areas of society, they will take control of the world. If we can get control of these 7 areas and establish God as control in those sectors, then God will be in control of the world, and it will trigger the end times. God will return. Okay? Now, why do they believe that, Nick? Why? I'll tell you. I've got 2 minutes, but I've got like 5 minutes left. So once again, I missed my marker by a few minutes, but bear with me. Here's why they believe this. There is a verse in Revelation, and they say this is based off of Revelations chapter 17. So if we go to Revelation chapter 17, there's a verse in Revelation chapter 17. It says this. We have it on the screen for you. It says, "This calls for a mind of wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills or mountains," depends how you translate it, "on which the woman sits." And so this is where they get the idea of 7 mountains. It's from this verse. Okay? Well, 7 mountains is there, right? It doesn't say what the 7 mountains are, but all right, 7 mountains are there. It also says that the 7 mountains are 7 heads. So there's that. It also says that there's a woman sitting on them. I mean, this is a single verse pulled out of context of an entire chapter. And if I encourage you, go read Revelation 17. The 7 hills are also kings. The 7 hills are also 7 heads of a beast that a woman is riding. It's absolutely not a literal 7 mountains. There's no way to read this literally as 7 mountains. It doesn't tell us what the 7 mountains are, except that they're kings and the head of a beast. It is a verse, and it is a partial verse, pulled out of context. But this is the verse, this is the chapter that this group of men say that this idea is rooted in, Revelation 17. As for ushering in the end times, there is also another verse, which we can put on the screen this morning, from Isaiah chapter 2, which says, "In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it." But again, one verse pulled out of an entire chapter. And all you have to do is look at Isaiah chapter 2, verse 1. And here's what it says. "This is what Isaiah, son of Amoz, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem." So we already know this is about a specific place and a specific time. This is not about the future of all things and the end of the world. It is taken out of context. And why am I saying this? Am I trying to be mean? I'm not trying to be Mr. Mean. What I am trying to say is that this entire thing is supposedly biblically based, and what it's biblically based on is 2 partial verses ripped out of their context. Now let me point out one other just logical problem with this as well, because proponents of this do believe that if we, Christians, take control of these 7 areas, and we do that by dominating them, by taking power over those areas and getting the right people in the right places. Does this sound familiar? Okay. Get the right people in the right places and dominate these areas, it will trigger about the end times. It will trigger about the return of God, because then God is the one who's on top of the mountain, the main mountain, because somehow the 7 mountains make a main mountain, and then God sits on top of the main mountain. In Matthew 24, the disciples asked Jesus, "When will the end of the age come? When will you return?" And Jesus says, "Nobody knows. Not even the Son knows. Only God the Father knows." In Luke 17, Jesus says it's going to be unexpected. It's going to be like a thief in the night. It's going to be like the days of Noah. People will be eating and drinking, and then God will return. In Thessalonians chapter 5, Paul says, like a thief in the night. 2 Peter 3:10, like a thief in the night. Revelation chapter 16, like a thief in the night. In absolutely 0 places in the entire Bible are we told that you and I get to control the second coming of Christ. 0 places are we told that. If we dominate the world, we don't get to force God to bring about the end times. That puts us in a position of power over God. Does that seem problematic? Okay, that is a formal heresy. For us to think that we have power over God is heretical. All of Jesus' teachings, whether in Revelation or in the gospel, all of the apostles' teaching about the end times, the entire point was to say, you don't know when the end times are coming, so be ready all the time. Jesus tells a parable about 10 virgins going out to meet the bridegroom. 5 were ready and 5 were not. It's a parable about being prepared all of the time. So for any pastor or church or author to be teaching that if you do X, Y, and Z, you can bring about the coming of God, 100% puts you in the driver's seat, not God. And that's a huge problem. So here's the 3 things. I'm just going to sum it up. 3 problems I have with the 7 Mountain Mandate. Biblical basis is 2 partial verses taken out of context. 2, it's Dominion Theology. And Dominion Theology is not Jesus' way, it's somebody else's way. Okay? I don't know how much clearer I can make that. And number 3, you and I don't have power over God. And we don't have power over God's timing. Again, you might say, okay, Nick, I'm with you. It makes sense. But how does it really affect me? I've never heard of this. I've never read the book. And the thing is, it affects you more than you know because Christian beliefs are being weaponized against you all the time. And that's the thing that scares me. And that's why I've chosen to talk about it this morning. Rather than giving you an ooh-rah sermon that's going to pump you up, make you feel good, and leave you out when you go out the doors, I'm engaging you on something that I think is worth you being aware of. Your Christian beliefs are being weaponized you as people's stepping stones to power all the time. And you need to be aware and wise to when that's happening. Again, last week I told you about a time in our church history where a specific way of understanding who Jesus is, a specific way of understanding what Christianity is, stood in the way of something as simple as saying, we believe rather than baptizing babies, it should be somebody who says, now I understand who Jesus is, and now I want to be baptized. And instead of being able to do that, groups in power with a specific understanding of Christianity stood in the way of it, and eventually even killed them. Am I worried about people being killed for that? No, I'm not worried about that. I'm not into fear-mongering about that sort of stuff. We're not living in a world or a town where people are going to get killed over baptism. But we do live in a place where people believe in the 7 Mountain Mandate and where they are doing everything they can to get their people into positions of power and authority to exercise control over the community. And that might sound good to you without thinking too much about it. Christian control over our community. That sounds good. Until it's not the Christianity that you agree with. And then you're stuck. I have to remind you of this on a Sunday morning because Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, beware of wolves in sheep's clothing. And maybe you feel like that's me today. And I'm sorry if that's how this has come across to you. But there are those who talk the talk, but whose way is not the way of Jesus. Beware of those who claim that. The way of Jesus has been made clear. And the things that Jesus rejected has been made clear. We have to dig into it and understand it. Jesus said, right after the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus in Matthew 10 says, I'm sending you guys out among wolves, so be shrewd as a snake and innocent as a dove. Our job is to look at this stuff and try to understand this stuff. And so I understand how logically this might make sense. If we want to control the world or control the nation, if we want to affect some sort of change, I understand how someone might say, well, Nick, doesn't this logically make sense? Sure, it seems like a good strategy. But don't tell me it's Christ's strategy, because it's not. This is domination, is what that is. That's not the strategy of Christ. So don't call it a Christian strategy, and don't tell me it's biblically based, because it's no more biblically based than this is. And it's taking the exact same path to power that this is. And that's a problem. Don't call it Christ-like. It isn't. Ours is not a way of power over. Ours is a way of service and sacrifice and love. Just dig into the Gospels and look at the story of Jesus and know that what he did was leave a place of absolute authority in order to lower himself to the lowest of the low to bring about our redemption. That is service, sacrifice, and love. Not the domination of the people around him. And when he interacted with everybody around him, he did not dominate them. He did not beat them with a Bible. I know he didn't have a Bible, so I don't need anybody to call me on history. But you know what I'm saying. That wasn't his way. And so my prayer for us is that you and I would have the wisdom to know the difference between power over and power under. That you and I would know the difference between when we feel like we've been called to abuse God's power and when the power of the Holy Spirit is working through us. Because there's a big difference. There's a big difference. May we choose the way of Christ. May we not fall prey to good plans that seem like there's an end result quickly. Let's pray.
Hi, this is Pastor Nick. Thanks for listening. I hope something that you heard today was very helpful. If you want to connect with us further, feel free to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, or our website, conoychurch.org. Sure, I'm glad we're in this together.